now that we are doing so many meetings over Zoom and streaming, we might begin to like it so much that even after the whole thing becomes safe to go, people will say, no need to come. Let's just do it over the Zoom. So I think eventually that might happen. Just a minute, let me. What happened? I'm just trying to get the right view, the grid view. Okay, yeah. All right. So I thought of this topic when Sushmita Di wrote to me about doing a Zoom retreat. For the last 3 months in Boston, we have already been doing this, what we call here the reflection on the Gita. And therefore, this has been on my mind for the last few weeks. And so I thought this might be an opportunity for me to kind of continue that reflection. The best lessons that we all receive in spiritual life are lessons that are received personally. And so, speaking about lessons in the Gita, my intention is not to suggest that these are the lessons you need to get from the Gita. What my intention is to show, these are the lessons that have come to me during my study of the Gita. And so the purpose is to encourage everyone to make their own personal study. And it's possible that a different lesson might come to you. There was one of the disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. His name was Swami Ramakrishna, Shashi Maharaj. He was the one who pioneered the order's work in the southern India. So he once said, when he was in Chennai, he said that Sri Ramakrishna gave a big message for Vivekananda, but a little message was kept for me. And then he never really explained what was that little message that he got from Ramakrishna. And so when I went to Chennai, I was there throughout the 80s and much of 90s. So when I first read that quote, and this question came to my mind, that what was that message that Swami Ramakrishna got from Sri Ramakrishna? And then it struck me that as we continue in our spiritual journey, messages come to us from different directions. It might come from the study of a book. It might come with a chance encounter with fellow devotees. It can come with one's interaction with other people while discussing spiritual life. And sometimes these messages come and we don't listen to them, or they just go by and we are not able to catch them. So oftentimes when Sri Ramakrishna asked his devotees, again he says, Savadhan, Savadhan, again in Kathamrita. And that oftentimes gets translated, and rightly so, as be careful or be alert. Now we have to be careful that our spiritual life does not get sidetracked. But to be careful in this subtler realm is that these lessons that life is teaching us all the time, if we are not careful, those lessons are wasted. It's a little bit like rain that is falling. And let's say you have covered your lawn with water resistant covering. So that rain then cannot go and fall into the soil and nourish the plants that are growing there. So if we want the ground to be benefited by the sunshine and the rain, shouldn't be any obstruction. So similarly, life is teaching us all the time. Nature is teaching us all the time. Sometimes we have a very limited idea about from where lessons come. Surely they can come in a kind of a retreat that we are having now, or through lectures. But a lot of times these lessons can come in most unexpected ways, at most unexpected times. It's a little bit like how much of what we study in school is something that knowledge that we apply after we graduate from schools and go out. And a lot of times we find that the knowledge and skills and the wisdom that has come to us, some of it surely has come from our time in school, from the lessons we learned from our teachers. But a lot has come outside the classroom. And so spiritual life should not remain limited only to study of scriptures and only to lectures and retreats like the one we are having now. Having said that, there is a benefit when we study a text like the Gita to get the lesson. And in order to get the lesson from the Gita, we will have to apply the teaching to our own life. So reading the Gita and understanding the meaning of every verse, reading the commentaries on the Gita is helpful, no doubt about it. But if I don't connect the Gita with my own life, then it will not have that transformative effect. It will not change me. I might become wiser. I might be able to speak more eloquently about the Gita, but it may not have changed my life at all. And so therefore, in order for spiritual life to have a transformative effect on us, we have to connect every little thing that we hear, every little thing that we read to our own daily life and say, if Sri Ramakrishna is saying something to his disciples, then we have to put ourselves in that place and say, what if he were saying that to me? Or what would he say that? What would he say to me if I were to ask him that question? So to just continue what I was saying about Swami Ramakrishna was that what was the little message that he got? And in fact, when I was at the Vedanta case, I wrote one small article on what I imagined might have been that message that he got. And I'm emphasizing on these lessons and message so much because at some point in life, every spiritual seeker will feel, among the lot of teachings that come from different directions, among the lot of books that we might read, something will come and resonate with us more than any other teaching. And then something within will say, that's the message for me. And once we have kind of discovered what message I have, then life becomes much simpler. Then all that we need to do is to work out that message. And so all the disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, they had received that message. They were alert, and each of the direct disciples were different. They were not identical at all. And so looking at their life, looking at what was the dominant trait in their life, we see that perhaps that was the message they received. So we have to then look at our own life and say that up to this point, whatever I have learned from my teacher and from other sources and books, what message have I got? Do I want my life to be just a collection of different teachings and trying a little bit of this now and trying a little bit of that some other time? Or for my life to have some kind of a unifying message to that. And so that was the idea when I undertook the study of the Gita for Boston Center that we have been doing. And that's what I intend to do in the next today and Saturday and Sunday morning. So one of the first lessons to me personally has been about identity. What is my identity? And this is something that comes right in the beginning of the Gita itself. I'm assuming that all of you are already familiar with the basic historical background of the Gita. And Arjuna's situation, why he refuses to fight in the battle. Arjuna is in a very difficult situation. It's what sometimes they say it's the catch-22 situation. I mean, one option for him is to either kill all his near and dear ones, people whom he respects, but also his own cousins and all of his own people, and then become victorious, but wouldn't be able to enjoy that victory at all after killing much of his family. Or the other option is be defeated and experience the humiliation of defeat. And then, of course, but he is not willing to admit that this dilemma. So instead of that, in the first chapter of the Gita, Arjuna just gives a long lecture to Krishna, telling him why war is bad, why war is wrong. Now, actually, I agree totally with what Arjuna said. There is really nothing, nobody can dispute what he said, really. But sometimes we might speak very wise words, we might say something very truthful, and yet that may not be the real problem at all. And that's what Krishna told Arjuna. There is this Prajna Vadamsa Bhashase. You're speaking like a very wise person, but the real problem is different. And then we remember those first two verses in the second chapter, when totally ignoring this kind of a very earnest little talk that Arjuna gave about the evils of war, Krishna's reaction is actually, he just as if he didn't hear what Arjuna said. It's like, get up, what is this unmanliness that has come upon you? Give up this and get up. So, again, we can kind of imagine, sometime if you have seen this, the B.R. Chopra version, the TV version of the Mahabharata, it can sometimes be useful to help visualize it, but it also is a little problematic because then we get conditioned to that way of thinking. Because then it becomes difficult then to kind of imagine yourself, or what must have been the scene that occurred on the battlefield. What must have been the expression on Krishna's face when he said those words to Arjuna? What must have been the impact of those words on Arjuna? And so if we can try to put ourselves in that place, and then we might see how powerful those two verses were. In fact, Swami Vivekananda, very, very typical of sometimes very hyperbolic statements that Swamiji used to make. He says that the entire gist of the Gita is in those two verses. And if you have understood what those two verses mean, you don't have to study the other parts of the Gita. But later on, those two verses where Krishna shakes Arjuna out of his talk of a wise person, but utter confusion inside. And then Arjuna recognizes that. And Arjuna says, I'm confused. And then he says, please accept me as your student. So we know Arjuna's situation more or less, as much as we can understand it from the outside. But what Krishna launches forth in the second chapter doesn't seem to have a direct connection with what Arjuna's problem is. And Arjuna's problem is, should I fight or not fight? It doesn't seem right to me to go to war. I just want to go home, but I don't know what to do. Tell me what to do. I think an ordinary teacher would have said, just go and fight. No questions asked. Just do it. And maybe Arjuna would have done that. But Krishna was a different teacher, different kind of a teacher. And so he launches forth into a discussion of the nature of the Atman. Remember, Arjuna's question was not, oh, what is this Atman? I've read about it. What does it mean? That was not the question. The question was, should I fight or not fight? What shall I do in this juncture, in the middle of the battlefield? And then Krishna is like, the Atman is birthless and deathless. What is the connection between the two? And one way of understanding that connection is that Krishna was trying to instill into Arjuna that this is your identity. You are the Atman. And then, of course, the Gita goes on where there are lots of other topics discussed. But I want to just today, for the next few minutes, talk about this identity. Why this identity is important. And why is it that that was the very first thing? The moment Krishna started teaching, he began with pointing out to Arjuna his true identity. Just yesterday, I think 2 days ago, probably yesterday, this one thought came to me, and I want to share it with you. And it is this: what with all this, the pandemic, and then we now more than 1,000 people dying every day. It's a matter of great concern. And so I was thinking, what happens after we die? Now that might seem to be like, what a question. But the truth is, nobody really knows what happens. What we have are a lot of texts. We have scriptures telling us what happens after death. And just as a matter of whether you believe in what those texts say, whether you have faith in what those scriptures say, and whatever your own hopes are. But nobody can say, I know what happens after death. But by knowing, I mean you really know, not just kind of an intellectual belief in or what seems logical. And the reason is, in order to know what happens after death, you have to die. After death, you can't come back to tell what happens. And therefore, it's always going to remain a mystery. There's one story I might have mentioned to you, and I'm also sure that most of you have forgotten it, so I can tell that again. There was this one young couple, and they were, just like we're talking about death and what happens after death. So they had talked about, like, what does happen after death? How would we even know what happens after death? And so they made a promise to each other. And it is that whichever of them dies first will come back and report what happens after death. And of course, how can you come back after death? So, but luckily they were into this, some people try to invite the spirits of the dead, and so they indulged in a little bit of that kind of. So they said, whoever dies first, then the other will try to bring the spirit of that partner, and then you have to then narrate what is after death. So then I will know. And it so happened that after some years, the husband died, and so this wife then called a few of her friends and said, this is the promise we had made to each other. So tonight I will invite the spirit of my husband, and then we will find out what is his experience. So what is there after death? What is he experiencing? And so they assemble whatever stuff they do, to contact the spirits. And luckily, she succeeded in getting the spirit of her husband. And his name was John. And so she said, John, how are you? And then the voice of the spirit. And the spirit said, I'm fine. It's such a wonderful place here. And she said, yeah, describe to me. We are all very curious to know what happens after death. Tell me about it. And then he said, it's beautiful sunshine, lots of sunshine, nice breeze blowing, greenery everywhere, lots and lots of grass. And there is no stress, no anxiety, no worry like we had on earth. Just eat and sleep, eat and sleep. And then she said, wow, at least now we know what heaven looks like. And then John says, what heaven? I'm not talking about heaven. I'm now in Montana. I've been reborn as a buffalo in Montana. So there is really no way to know what happens after death. So because we don't know, other than what the texts say, we are free to imagine what could happen or what might happen. So while I was thinking like this thought came to my mind, that suppose a person dies, and then suddenly this person finds himself in front of a door, a closed door, a very big, imposing door. And the door is closed. There is no one around. There is no way to know whether it's day or night. There is no indication of any kind, and there is nobody else, and just a closed door in front. And then suddenly, these words appear on the door. Who are you? And as most of us would do, anyone would ask that question to us, who are you? This person then says what that person's name is. I'm John or Narayan or whatever my person's name is. And then from inside, again, the letters appear. Who? So my identity with my name just doesn't work. And then I probably imagine, suppose I were the person standing outside the door, and I tell them my name, and it says we don't know this person. And then I say maybe I need to identify myself with some other details about me. So I might say, well, I am now from Boston, and I might identify myself in terms of my age and my gender or my position, what positions I've been holding, or what work that I have been doing, or what nationality I have, or what religion I practice. And none of those answers are found satisfactory. Maybe a message comes and says, well, all of those really things are connected with your body, and the body has been left behind. You don't have the body anymore. A lot of these things are with your mind, which is not you. Who are you apart from your body, your mind, your talents, and your skills? Who are you? And that is the kind of question Krishna wanted Arjuna to reflect over. And that's the kind of question we need to ask ourselves. That if someone were to ask that question to me, who are you? What kind of an answer will I give which is not connected with my body and mind? What is my identity? Other than my name and place and work, do I have any identity apart from that? And that is why Krishna begins the teaching with characteristics of the Atman. Sri Ramakrishna in one place says how the kind of clothes we wear or the kind of language we speak affects our behavior. So I wish I'd marked that passage. I could have read it out to you from the Gospel. So he says, in India those days, wearing a coat and a pant would be like whatever the Englishmen, the British people wore, and that was not the native Indian dress. And so if someone, Sri Ramakrishna says, if someone wears shoes and coat, and the way that person walks and the way that person will behave will be very different than if you are wearing some kind of a native dress. And we've seen that in our own lives as well, which is why we have different kind of clothes that we wear to different occasions. If you go to a temple, you wear a different kind of clothes. If you are going for a party or at the workplace, you have different clothes. And oftentimes, the clothes that we wear and the company that we move in, our style of relating to people also changes. Also with different people. For instance, if a person is with his or her parents, then the identity of this person is, I am a son or a daughter. And the way I will speak with my parents is a very different way than when I will be speaking with my own children. Because at that time, my identity has changed from being a son or a daughter to being a father or a mother. So that way, and if you go to your workplace and you are speaking with the other people who work with you, depending on whatever positions they hold, your behavior, your way of speaking, your way of addressing them, your way of dealing with them will be very different. So throughout the day, we are very effortlessly switching these identities. We have one identity at home, and again, there is not just one identity at home. Depending with different people within the family, we have a different identity that comes on the surface. And we do it so effortlessly that we sometimes think, I'm the same person. Well, yes, in reality, I'm the same person. But the person who is operating in this world is not really same, because every time I'm putting on a different garb and a different identity when I'm dealing with different people. What spiritual life means is to just remove all those layers, remove all those masks. Then that would be my true identity. An identity that will not change with time, that will not change with place, that will not change no matter in whose company I am. And therefore, when we say that I'm a devotee or I'm a spiritual seeker, now, being a devotee or a bhakta is an identity. Being a spiritual seeker is an identity. And just like my identities keep on changing throughout the day, my spiritual identity as a bhakta or a devotee or a spiritual seeker, that also becomes one of the many identities we have. And usually that identity might become the dominant identity as long as, let's say, I'm visiting a temple or I'm reading a scriptural passage or I'm doing my daily japa and meditation. That is the time I'm reminded I'm a bhakta, I'm a devotee. But then when you are going grocery shopping or when you are going someplace else, that time, it's not that you've forgotten that you're a bhakta, but that identity is not the uppermost. So it's not a bhakta who is going and doing grocery. is usually a father or a son who is going in, or a daughter who is going and doing groceries. When I go at my workplace, who is, suppose I'm a teacher. When I teach, my teacher's identity comes on the uppermost level. And that time, not that I've stopped becoming a spiritual seeker, but the spiritual seeker identity is not the uppermost in my mind. Now, why am I saying all this? What I'm trying to drive at is that among all these several identities that we simultaneously carry, and we keep on changing them, like some people have multiple credit cards they use. And each credit card might have some benefits, and so people use different cards at different places. Not everyone has too many cards, but some people do. But over time, we might discover that you might begin to start using one of your cards more than other cards. You somehow find, oh, this works best for me. So our identities can be like the multiple cards that people carry. But over time, we might find that this identity works best for me, or that's an identity that best I feel more comfortable in that identity. And therefore, then that becomes my dominant identity. It's like people who are now, let's say, what we might say, political junkies, very much interested in politics, are very active in politics. So it's possible that in the 24 hours every day, their political identity might become the uppermost identity in their mind. So no matter whoever they meet, whoever they talk to, the question will be, are these people Democrats or are they Republicans? Who are they going to vote for? If that is the dominant identity, that question comes more often than, let's say, if someone is more interested in sports, or say baseball or football or whichever game, then if you meet someone, you say, which team is this person rooting for? So in order for us to become spiritual seekers, we have to find out how often in the course of a day am I using my spiritual seeker identity? How often in the course of a day my identity as a bhakta, my identity as a sadhaka becomes uppermost? Because only when my spiritual seeker identity or a bhakta identity becomes the dominant identity, then I can truly call myself a bhakta or a spiritual seeker, because that is then become my dominant identity. Until that time, we cannot really say so. There is this one beautiful verse in the Gita, it comes much later, where Krishna is describing what kind of people turn to God. The verse goes like this: Chaturvidha bhajante mam jana sukritinorjuna arto jitnyasu artharthi jnani cha bharatarshabha. So what Krishna is saying is that 4 kinds of people turn to God. It's very, very clear distinction there. Artaha, jitnyasu, artharthi, and jnani. Now, artaha means one who is suffering, one who is distressed. And that distress can come through any number of reasons. Well, right now, because of the coronavirus, everyone is distressed. So everyone is kind of an artha of some kind or the other. So that distress can come due to concerns about physical health. That suffering can come due to one's job situation or difficulties at work. It can come through, really, well, there are hundreds and thousands of ways suffering can come. And we shouldn't even try to list them all. But we know that oftentimes, even though we may not be thinking about God all the time, when there is a physical or mental distress, and there isn't oftentimes an easy way to solve that, to overcome that, then at least some people, I mean, there might be some people who totally don't believe in God and may not do anything. But many people, at such times at least, even if they may not think of God at other times, but in times of suffering, turn to God. So those are arthas, the distressed people, who are seeking relief from their suffering. I remember, and I think that's probably true everywhere in the world. I remember in India when I was growing up, and whenever exams would come near, many students would often either visit a temple or just try to say some short prayer. And after the exams are over, then they don't have to pray again until the next exam comes near. So, well, that's the suffering caused by anxiety that about how I might do in an exam. So, artha, these are the one kind of people that turn to God, who are, you might say, relief seekers, seeking relief from their suffering. The second kind of people who turn to God are artharthi. Now, artha means which brings meaning, which fulfills us, something that is fulfilling. And arthi means words in Indian languages, in Sanskrit also, which end with arthi. Vidyarthi, one who wants vidya, one who wants knowledge. So arthi, so artharthi. Artha is often translated also as wealth. And so people who want wealth, because we know that a lot of the things that we need in today's world can be bought. If you have money, you can buy. You can't buy everything, but you can buy a lot of things. And so people who seek wealth belong to artharthi. But also, general prosperity also can bring a lot of fulfillment in one's life. So even artharthi can be translated as a prosperity seeker. There are a lot of people who find that power, if you have power in hand, you can accomplish a lot of things. So artharthi can also be translated as power seekers, because all of these things seem to bring, if not total fulfillment, at least some kind of fulfillment. And so to attain that kind of fulfillment, people turn to God. And then the third is jidnyasu. Jidnyasu means one who wants to know. And this group of people is becoming much less today, you might say, because that is a seeker of knowledge. Now, a student, normally we say one who goes to a school and then registered for some course at school or enrolled in school, we say that person is a student. But if you look at the Sanskrit word vidyarthi, not everyone who goes to school is a vidyarthi. Because vidyarthi means one who seeks knowledge. Now, do all students who go to school, are they seeking knowledge, or they're just seeking a degree? They know that, well, if I get a degree, I'll get a good job. And so, but a better description for them would be, they are degree arthis, not vidyarthis. And so, to be seeker of knowledge is a very, very high thing in some ways, because the first two, artharthi and artha, essentially they are seeking things to make things better at their physical and mental level. the body and mind, some kind of entertaining of the mind, comfort, physical comfort. But knowledge is the world of ideas, the world of knowledge is in many ways a purer world than this material world. And so seeker of knowledge may at some time, these sincere seekers of knowledge might at some point discover that no matter how many books I study, it's never going to be enough. And the best way to know how little we know is to just visit a library. Not an online library, just go to a real library. And when you see the stacks and stacks of books, hundreds and thousands of books, and then we suddenly realize, how little do I know? How little have I even read? I mean, it could be a relief also that, well, not having read all these books, I'm still doing fine. That could be one way of thinking. But also, it just makes us realize that we know so little. And if I am really hungry for knowledge, then even such a person might turn to God and say, God, give me the wisdom so that I may be able to acquire more knowledge in the limited time that is available to me. That's why the Gayatri prayer, where the awakening of the Dhi is really for awakening that efficiency to acquire knowledge and retain it. And so that's the third category, knowledge seekers. So we have seen relief seekers, artha, the wealth seekers, if you like, artharthi, knowledge seekers, jitnyasu. And a fourth category, Krishna says, is jnani. Now, jnani are the ones who seek knowledge. And that's the word. The word jnani really means the wise one or the knower one. So how is this jnani different from the jitnyasu? The jitnyasu also wants knowledge. Now, what is meant by jnani here is that this person is really known. First three groups, whether they are seeking freedom from pain or wealth or knowledge, material knowledge, they are all seeking things in this world, things that are available in this world. And a jnani is one who has realized that while I get things in this world might bring me some fulfillment, some satisfaction, some joy, it can never bring me total fulfillment. The problem is not in the things in the world. The problem is the world itself. So a jnani, that fourth category, is one who does not want God as a means to bring him or her something, as a means to bring freedom from either distress or lack of fulfillment or lack of knowledge. This jnani wants God for God's sake. Looks upon God as the goal itself, not as a means to a goal. And therefore the jnani is in a real sense the spiritual seeker. So now when we look at our own lives and look at why we like to think of ourselves as spiritual seekers, what is it that made spiritual life important to us? What are the reasons that take me and make me think of God? We need to take all these questions to heart and ask myself, how often when I pray, when I meditate, how often when I think of God, how often do I approach God as an artha, how often I approach God as a jitnyasu, how often I approach God as an artharthi, and how often I approach God as a jnani. Now, Krishna says, Udara sarva evaite. Udara means all are noble and good. He doesn't put down anybody. He doesn't say that, oh, this is inferior, that is superior. He says all of these are good. Why are they all good? Because although the first three are not really seeking God for any spiritual reason directly, they have at least turned to the right person to seek whatever they want. Rather than finding a worldly solution to a worldly problem, at least they are trying to find a divine solution to a worldly problem. So if someone wants money, rather than going and cheating and looting and stealing from someone, it is better to ask God to give me money. So turning to God is best. There's one, I would share with you one little incident that Swami Swahanandaji, one of our very senior Swamijis, was in Southern California for many years. He passed away a few years ago. So he told this to me quite some years ago. So when he came to this country, I think he came sometime in late 60s. And he was a very young Swami then. And he said one day he was visiting our center in Seattle. And Swamiji in Seattle was Swami Vividishanandaji. He was a much elderly monk then compared to Swami Swahanandaji. He was a disciple of, I think he was a disciple of Raja Maharaj, or Brahmanandaji. So Swami Swahanandaji went, and Vividishanandaji was a very elderly monk. He was. And that time, Vividishanandaji was telling him the main building of the Seattle Center had become very old and needed a lot of repairs and renovation. And he said, there's so much repair and there are so many expenses involved. So I just prayed to Thakur, prayed to Ramakrishna that somehow this enough funds will come so I can, he could fix those, make those repairs. And Swami Swahanandaji said to him, clearly, jokingly, but he said to him, Maharaj, why would you ask Thakur for money to build your center or to repair? Shouldn't we be just like Ramakrishna when he prayed to the Divine Mother Kali? All that he said was, just give me Jnana, Bhakti, Vairagya. These are the things we ask for. And that's what Thakur asked us, that this is how we should pray. And you are just praying so that he should give you some funds to repair your center. And then Swahanandaji was saying, this old Swami was just with his tears in his eyes, and he says, Thakuri to amar sorboswa, ami ar kake giye bolbo in Bengali. So what he meant was, Thakur is my everything. Who else will I ask for? And then Swahanandaji said, I felt so bad for even bringing that up, because he said with such feeling, and clearly that would be one way a devotee can see that God is my all in all. Just as when we go and ask something from our parents, we don't feel like I'm begging. We just feel my parents are my own. They will do anything for me. So just as we feel that as little babies, the kind of connection we feel with our parents. And so if I have reached that stage when I feel that God is my all in all, I don't seek help from anyone, because I don't kind of think of asking anything from anyone, so I can ask from God. So So there is this side to it which we keep in mind, but what Krishna is pointing out here is people who are asking for all these things, but they are turning to God rather than turning to worldly reasons. So Krishna says, all are udaras, all are good, and all are noble. But, there is a but, and then Krishna says, Jnani tu atmaiva matam, that all the four are good, but among these four, the last one, who is the real spiritual seeker, that spiritual seeker is my own self. The reason is that if I'm seeking God not as some kind of a divine ATM machine that who can give me whatever I want, what if I want God? I don't want anything. I don't want anything else. I just want God. So Krishna says, if that's what I want, if God is the goal, God is not the means to a goal, then Atmaiva Matam, then that person, identity, although in theistic language it would mean that person is my own self, but in philosophically, that person is truly the Atman. So the Atman that Krishna begins to teach Arjuna in the second chapter is the Atman that he refers to as Jnani later on, and distinguishes that spiritual seeker from these other people who turn to God. So this was something that when we try to look at our own life, especially from the perspective of the Gita, we can ask ourselves that which of my different identities has become more dominant. When we find in our life that more and more often, from the time I wake up in the morning till the time I go to sleep, while these other identities may come and go, the different relationships that we have, the identity that we have, the position that we hold at our workplace, the different interests that we might have, all these connections are fleeting, but which is the identity that remains constantly throughout the course of the day? Which is why then we are told, try to think of God always. Those of you who have read that book, The Way of a Pilgrim, there is this injunction there, pray unceasingly. We might begin by saying, pray in the morning and pray in the evening. That is sometimes when meditation, when someone learns meditation, some people ask the question of when they learn how to do japa, how much minimum do I have to do? That's an interesting question. There are people who want to do meditation, but don't want meditation to kind of take over their lives. So want to have the feeling, the satisfaction of doing meditation, which but what is the basic minimum that I need to do? And that's good. I mean, it's better than not doing meditation, clearly. But if that's what I'm doing, I cannot rightly call myself as bhakta. I cannot call myself a devotee. I cannot call myself a spiritual seeker. Because at that time, that identity is there, but that is one among the 200 identities I have. But if I have to rightfully and honestly call myself a spiritual seeker, then I must have that identity coming up in my mind more often in the course of the day. Not just twice in the day, not just in the morning and evening. And so if I can find different ways, that's why people do devotional singing, people do parayanas, they read the Gita, they do Vishnu Sahasranama, or they read books, they go to temples, they go for pilgrimages. Now all these are different ways of affirming our spiritual identity more often. And the goal before us, therefore, is to try to affirm that identity as often as we can. So much so that a time should come when my spiritual identity, that I'm a spiritual seeker, I'm a devotee, I'm a bhakta, that identity should always be present. So even when I'm with my parents, I'm a son or a daughter who is a bhakta. When I'm with my children, I'm a father or a mother who is a bhakta. So the bhakta or a devotee or a spiritual seeker identity should never ever vanish from my mind. Even if you're doing shopping, when you go shopping, here is a spiritual seeker who is shopping, not a shopper who sometimes thinks of God. So that is the importance of identity in our lives. And when that happens, you will see life will change for you. The more often I remember, somehow I remember that what Sri Ramakrishna said, the ripe I, the ripe ego, the more often that is uppermost in my mind, my personality will change. The way I deal with other people, the way I do my work, the way I speak, the way I walk, the way I sleep, everything will change. And therefore, as we continue our spiritual practices, we have to pay special attention to what my identity is and how often I use my spiritual identity. So I'll stop here now so that we have a few minutes for whatever comments or questions you might have.
Good thing.
Hari Om.
If anyone has any questions, you can either type in the chat or right now, since there are nobody who has typed, you can go ahead and ask anyone.
I'm not looking at the chat messages on my little screen, so you'll have to speak it out here.
Maharaj, I have while others are preparing their questions, I have a story to share.
Yeah.
Regarding imaginative exercise you mentioned in the beginning. After death, if you see a door. I recently heard this story. It's not in Mahabharata, but it's one of those stories fabricated out of Mahabharata.
Oh, really? Such a story exists? I thought it just kind of cooked it up from my mind.
No, not that, Maharaj, but
okay.
Something similar.
Okay.
When Abhimanyu died, Arjuna was very sad, and Krishna tried to inspire him again, but still Arjuna was not able to come out of that sadness. So then Krishna takes him to Swargaloka, where Abhimanyu is right now after death. And when Arjuna sees Abhimanyu, Abhimanyu does not recognize Arjuna. So Krishna says that all these identities of father, son, they belong only to mortal life, not beyond that.
That's a very good story, and it can be actually, in some ways, I'm enjoying that story, and I'm sure many of us will find that story very instructive. But it might also disturb some people, because there are a lot of people who look forward to dying, and then with the belief that they will be then able to meet their dear ones after death. And so now to say, if I go there and no one is going to recognize each other, may be a little problematic for some people. And actually, but recognizing others is also problematic. It's like someone says, oh, after I die, I was so attached to my grandfather. I would like to go and meet my grandfather after my death in that some Pitraloka or whichever loka it is. And a lot of people say that, and so long as they don't reason it out, I think it's fine. But the moment you start analyzing it, we just realize how problematic it is. Because if I want to go and meet my grandfather after my death, what form my grandfather would be, because I've seen my grandfather as an old man. And so I want, if I have to recognize him, I have to see an old person sitting there. I don't think my grandfather wants to remain an old man for eternity there. He would like to be he was once a youngster. And if my grandfather's parents want to see him, they don't want to see him as an old man. They want to see him as a little boy. And so even if we meet our relatives after death, it's not going to be easy, but even from a logistically very difficult situation, isn't it?
Maharaj, Skanda has a question.
Yeah.
Skanda, go ahead.
Can you remind about the difference between Jignasu and Jnani?
Say that again. The difference between the two?
Yeah.
Yes. So Jnani is the one who is seeking, who has this intense desire to know. And it's not about knowing the Atman or anything, just knowledge. Wants to study astronomy, physics, lots of questions that come as we explore the world. And so that is a Jignasu, one who wants to know. And Jnani is the one who knows that nothing in this world can bring me satisfaction. Only God alone can solve my problems forever. So one who has realized that there is no material solution to this, what is essentially a spiritual problem. So that person is a Jnani. So Jnani, I mean, sometimes people have interpreted that Jnani to mean, oh, that's an enlightened being. To me, that doesn't seem to make much sense, because it just begins by saying Chaturvida Bhajante Mam. An enlightened person who is already enlightened doesn't need to then turn to God for anything, because that person is already experiencing oneness and there is no need to turn. And so when I read that verse, to me it appears that the Jnani is actually a true spiritual seeker.
Thank you.
Right.
Kunalda had a question, but it is similar to this one. But Kunalda, if you would like to ask further, you can go ahead.
So here, Jnani, does it also include people who are seeking Paravidya and not necessarily one who knows? Because it seems that Jignasu is the one who is seeking Aparavidya, or the material.
Yep.
And so the Jnani is the seeker of the higher knowledge. But ordinarily we use Jnani as the knower. So
so that one, what you said is correct. So Jnani can be one who's seeking Paravidya as opposed as distinct from Jignasu, who's seeking Aparavidya.
Chandida, go ahead.
Namaskar, Pranam Maharaj. In Gita, in the first adhyaya, the way Arjuna was talking, it appeared to be that he is influenced by Satta Guna, and then in the next chapter, how Sri Krishna started explaining to him. It appears that Sadharma is more important than what is good or bad. Doesn't matter. Sadharma is having the highest priority. Is that right?
No, it depends on what you mean by good or bad.
Apparently good or bad, not the real good and bad, but some people might think that is bad, but Swadharma, if it is Swadharma, then even it apparently bad for some people, but has to be done.
Yeah, but the most choices in life are not between good and bad. I mean, if there is a choice between good and bad, it's very easy. Choose the good and avoid the bad. But there are oftentimes situations in life when the choice is not between good and bad, the choice is between bad and worse. So what do? You have to choose, but the choice is only between that which is bad and that which is worse. Now, if between those two, bad is better than worse, better in the sense it's a better choice than worse, that doesn't make bad good. Bad, if it is bad, but it is a better choice than what is worse. So that was really the situation in which Arjuna was there. So going to a battle and killing, whether they are your own family or not, it's not like killing somebody else is all right and killing one's own family is bad. It isn't like that. Killing is bad, that's true. But not going to war in this situation would have created a much greater catastrophe than going to war. So it was not between Swadharma, the choice here was not between good and bad. In Arjuna's case, the choice was between bad and worse.
Okay. Yeah.
And so always we have to choose what is good over bad, but always make a better choice, at least the choice that is closer to good than to bad.
Thank you.
Pranam,
In fact,
I have
yeah,
a
go ahead.
question.
Yeah.
So, how do you try to keep the spiritual identity or the bhakta identity higher when you're engrossed in work? People like us go routinely to work and
Well, we have to find creative ways to try to retain our bhakta identity. And one way many people have found helpful is if you have a short prayer or if you have a mantra received from a guru, then try to repeat that mantra now and then. You can't be doing it continuously because you have things to attend at the work. But find a creative way to do it. Maybe every time nowadays most people carry mobile phones and notifications keep on coming. And so there are lots of people who get text messages or WhatsApp. So if someone says, every time I'm going to read a WhatsApp message or every time I go to social media, I'm going to repeat my mantra 5 times and only then check my messages. And usually mantras are very short. It's not like it's going to take 2 hours to do it. But if someone can make a rule like that, you'll already find you'll be able to do a lot more japa than you're doing between morning and evening. And so that is a way to kind of keep that connection. And you will see that the more often you are able to remember God, more often you are able to remember your Ishta in the course of the day, the quality of your evening meditation will improve. The thing is, if I pray to God in the morning, I do a little japa in the morning, and then I'm so engrossed in my work the entire day that I don't even think about God at all, which really means my spiritual identity has gone to the bottom of the barrel in the course of the day. And then suddenly in the evening, I want to go into samadhi again. It doesn't work. And so it becomes very difficult. And so if I can find a way to keep my spiritual identity away on the upper levels, even if not the uppermost, then it might be easier to meditate well in the evening. And similarly, if I try to think of God while I'm going to sleep and kind of gently glide into sleep as you're mentally repeating the mantra, then your morning meditation might improve. And so we have to find a way to somehow keep this identity alive.
Next is from Archana. She is asking, can you help us understand the difference between Swarupa and Swabhava?
It just, Bandhya, just 2 words. Swarupa means one's own nature, Swabhava. I mean, again, I think what we will need is specific verses or places where these words have been used. Because simply if you just take these isolated words, Swarupa and Swabhava, they can almost be used interchangeably. They are not very technical terms. They are just kind of regular words in a Sanskrit language. And they can be used interchangeably. But it's possible that in some verses and in some books, these words have been used in some specific sense. And there are a lot of words like that. I mean, although now when we speak about body, mind, Atman, the word Atman, we usually mean that spiritual part. And I've used the word Atman so many times just today. But it's good to remember that in Sanskrit language, the word Atman simply means self, I. And so there have been cases in Gita as well when the word Atman really means the body. There is a time when Atman means the Vedas. So every time you see the word Atman in Sanskrit, you shouldn't mechanically think, oh, it is this birthless and deathless Atman. So context becomes important also.
There is one more question from Jeff. Jeff, you can go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Maharaj.
Yeah.
I was thinking of your story of going to the afterlife and no one knowing us. And I'm thinking that might be a little like our situation with rebirth, because even now we may be connecting with many of our former loved ones, family members from other lives, but we don't recognize them and they don't recognize us. Because we're in this new form.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, it's a blessing that we don't recognize them. Life will become so complicated if you kind of go out into the streets and you say, oh, last birth, this person did this to me. It will become very difficult if you remembered all these things. In fact, it's a blessing that we don't remember everything in this life itself. What to forget about last life? I mean, that's a great blessing. In fact, there is I don't know whether that person is still living. I read this a few years ago. There is this one young woman, I mean, now she must be old, in Maryland. And I forget what the medical name of that disease is, but it is a disease when one cannot forget things. And it's problematic. So there is this woman I read about. So if you ask her, what did you have for breakfast in 1986, 23rd January? Actually, she can tell you exactly what she had. Now we might think, wow, that would be like a great blessing.
Wonderful.
But actually it's problematic and she has been under medication. And so then we realize that many things that we forget in our daily life is actually a great blessing.
I remember you once told us 2 things we should remember and 2 things we should forget.
Yeah. Okay. Tell me what are the things we should remember.
So we should remember that all things will pass away and God alone is real.
Okay.
And we should forget anything good that we've done for others or anything bad they've done to us.
Yes, very good. Yeah, that's really very helpful, those 4 things. Yeah, I mean, it's not, this is not to kind of reduce the entire spiritual life to those 4 things, but if we try to practice them as much as we can, it really is very helpful.
Thank you, Maharaj.
All right, so I think we should stop now, right?
Okay, Maharaj. Yeah.
All right, and then
Thank you,
so
Maharaj.
we'll meet tomorrow at the same time.
Same time. Yes.
All right. So let me conclude with a prayer. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagatgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. Hari Om Hari Om. So I'll see you all